Good afternoon. This is Dr. Craig Stern of Pharma Pharmaceutical Consultants and ProData Analytics. I'm delighted to have a chance to talk to you again today. I wanted to talk about drug pricing, since that seems to be all over the media these days, but I want to take it from a standpoint that isn't a political standpoint. It's not trying to take a position with pharma, against pharma, or otherwise, but just talk about drug pricing so that as we continue in these discussions, we have information about how to use. So if I may, let me start with the beginning, and that is drug pricing historically has in general increased somewhere around 7 to 12% on a yearly basis. It's been very common to have single-digit cost inflation around 7%, but it varies with different companies and different products. And the main issue about that, one issue is that it has been a issue where the pharmaceutical industry has argued that this is a small percent of the total healthcare cost, no more than about 11% of total healthcare cost. And the initial starting point for a drug cost has always been at some reasonable number, although some people would argue that it was too high, but it was always at a number where it didn't require financing or some sort of other financial vehicle in order to try and pay for it. The con argument has been that drug costs are higher than what goes on with the cost of living. Assuming, just to be simplistic about it, the cost of living goes up about 3% a year, and drug costs go up something in excess of that, then the argument has been that people may get a 3% or so increase in their salary per year, but that drug costs then cost 2% or more than that, which makes them less affordable over time. So that's been the historical argument. The thing that has changed, obviously, has been where several manufacturers have taken products for which there is no research and development involved. They've already had research and development. They've bought new products. There's been consolidation of manufacturers, et cetera, and they've bought these products. And now they've raised the initial ticket price of these drugs. And so two things has happened. One is that the initial ticket price has been increased to very high levels. And secondly, that the inflation on these products has been in triple digits or more based on what the products were available before, or even if they were an entirely new product, such as the specialty medications that have, in general, an average dose cost of about $1,500 in comparison, for example, to a traditional branded drug that costs about $135 for a 30-day supply. The initial ticket price has been raised significantly, and the inflation rate has increased significantly. So what to do about this, and what are the arguments for and against? One is, as I've indicated, this cost of living argument. And the cost of living argument is that if on a general basis cost of living is going up about 3% a year, but we're dealing with drugs that have cost increases of 600% or more, it makes them less and less achievable with regard to what they can buy, as well as the fact that the initial ticket price is so high from the very beginning. So that's one argument for and against about it. The second issue is that some manufacturers have looked at this and said, well, there has been some manufacturers that have had these exorbitant price increases, but what they're going to do in major manufacturers is hold their price increases to a single-digit price inflation a year, somewhat like what I talked about historically, where there was a price included and it would increase at something reasonable, at least from what they had been doing historically, maybe considerably more than the cost of living, but not double-digit, not triple-digit cost inflation. What is common in the cost of drugs is that the cost of a given drug is a given number. There is not transparency in that. So whatever and however that price is achieved, or whatever people are using, it isn't quite clear where this price is coming from, what's included and not. it is very common for manufacturers to identify that the cost of a new drug is deals with the research and development if it's a new drug, or the distribution and marketing fees of an older drug, and that there's some premium for drugs that didn't make it. So effectively, in that particular category, they may have research-given drugs. They didn't make it to market for a host of different reasons, and so there's a premium that is being paid for that, as well as potentially a cost of living increase in that. Because it's not transparent, it's not clear how much of the price of a drug for a new drug includes that premium, and how much of it is actually for the cost of goods or the raw materials, as well as issues with regard to research and development. And many of these arguments that have gone on between pharma and government, including what goes on in Medicaid programs, issues with regard to private insurers and public insurers that are dealing with Medicare and Medicaid, is to try and deal with how do you deal with the cost. And the arguments have gone back and forth where manufacturers have said, well, we're charging a given price, but in fact, that's not what the patient pays, because money goes to the PBM, Pharmacy Benefit Manager, for rebates. Some of it goes to a health plan. Some of it may go to drug wholesalers and pharmacies, etc. So there's multiple people in between. The question, however, is that while everybody is making something off the drug, that's a true statement, and there isn't a lot of argument that people are handling the drug, whether it's a drug wholesaler and a pharmacy, or getting a premium for handling the drug and whatever profit that they have, profit premium that they have tied up. But also PBMs and health plans and others are still making money off of these drugs as well. So part of the argument is that whatever is the ticket price that's out there is not necessarily the price. But it all leads down to the fact that there isn't a transparency in the pricing, so no one really knows. The discussion, and I've written about this, other people have written about it as well, but the question is, if we're going to deal with transparency, and that has been a signal, a movement and driver in what goes on in healthcare since at least 2008, and certainly before that in all of the discussions that went on in Medicare, Medicare Part D, etc. The question is what are these prices? And if we move to transparency, then many of the things we need to talk about are the following. One is, what is the actual cost of raw materials? How much do the raw materials cost to make the drug? Second, what is the actual premium for research and development for that particular agent? So we've got an idea of what is the premium that is being paid for that. Third is that if we're going to bring in the costs of drugs that didn't make it, we need to have some idea of what is the premium that we're paying for all the drugs that didn't make it. It's effectively a kind of an accounting sheet that identifies what the raw materials are, what the cost of research and development is, what's the cost of the drugs that didn't make it, what is the overall issue with regard to any cost of living increases and what goes on. And then, of course, the newest thing is with regard to the value. There's always been a question, does the drug add to value? And part of the argument has been, is this a totally new drug that is adding new therapy that has not been available in the past? Or is this a therapy that looks like everything else? A good deal of the research that goes on today is in what is known as non-inferiority trials, which essentially says, my drug is no different than everybody else's, and so therefore you get the same benefits and you get the same risks. Well, the thing that people are asking is as we drive from volume to value, what is the premium that we're giving for value? And that's part of the discussions that are going on. There's a significant percentage of health plans today and many PBMs who are paying a value component to the drug price in order to try and identify that a drug that really has great value is worth more than a drug who has less value. And then the question is, Are we using guidelines so that we're subsetting the patient population so the people who are not very severe are getting potentially the lowest cost, potentially generic drugs that cost less in order to treat the condition? And then as severity increases, are we dealing with those people and comparing to a comparable subset in order to deal with that? Those issues are currently in negotiation. There isn't a well-defined, well-worn kind of definition for it. There's certainly the pharmaceutical manufacturers and a good deal of pharmacy has also gotten involved in pharmacoeconomics, talking about where there is a value in some of these based on what is the overall cost and what is the overall benefit of these drugs. And people are kind of arguing that issue. But the bottom line is, what is this premium for value, and what are people going to address in order to try and bring more transparency into the system? The other thing that is not being done is, what is the premium that is going on year over year on a per capita basis, on a PMPM basis? And that is, in each particular health plan or plan sponsor or public entity, the issue is that there's a particular cost that has been assigned, budgeted for drugs, and now if we're going to make that more transparent, then the question is, what part of that premium is for the cost of goods, the raw materials? What part of that is for research and development? What part of that is the premium for drugs that failed, that are part of this overall cost? What part of that is for cost of living? What part of that is for a value proposition? These are all open to debate, and I think it's important that we bring them up so that as we go through these discussions, we have a knowledge of what are the drivers and how are we going to accumulate this information in order to try and come up with some understanding of what people are willing to pay. Because at the base today, with a higher ticket price and higher inflation, we're now moving from drugs that could be individually purchased without significant financing options, with now where we have to start looking at financing options similar to what we would do when we buy a car, a house, or otherwise, because of the overall cost of these medications and the need to subset the population so that people are not paying an egregious amount when they're not very sick versus those that are very sick. I hope we found this of interest. We would be very interested if you wish to respond to us, give us your thoughts, give us your comments, your criticisms. This is a discussion, and we're always interested in that. Feel free to respond. And as always, please refer to www.profarmaconsultants.com/rxinfox.html for current news, what's going on, and certainly our pharmacy benefit news that comes out every 2 weeks talking about general issues. Thank you and have an outstanding day. How was that?